Hello everyone, welcome to the next review. This is the Jungle Books by Rudyard Kipling. So I'll start with a comparison between The Hobbit and Silmarillion. So if you think of The Hobbit as of course a children's book, the language is very simple and straightforward. In the Silmarillion, several steps above The Hobbit. Silmarillion is this great cosmological narrative with thousands and thousands of years of history, archaic language, laws, customs, history, religion, language, all that sort of stuff. The comparison here is quite apt because the Jungle Book, some of you may be aware of the true nature of the Jungle Book. However, a lot of people's conception of these stories, the Mowgli stories, the Mowgli narrative, is really just comes from the 1960s Disney version, the sort of comedic children's film version with singing, dancing, and whatnot. The true Jungle Book is very much darker, more archaic, more weighty and considered and stately, much more poignant as well. And that's really is what where I want to start off with this review. And before we get into the structure of the book and what I feel about it, and I should clarify that I've actually read all the stories save one. It's a story that I've been struggling to get into. So, but just to give you an idea of what this book actually sounds like, and keep in the back of your mind as I'm doing this review, the 1960s Disney version. The tiger's roar filled the cave with thunder. Mother Wolf shook herself clear of the cubs and sprang forward, her eyes like two green moons in the darkness facing the blazing eyes of Shere Khan. And it is I, Raksha the demon, who answer. The man's cub is mine, Lungree, mine to me. He shall not be killed. He shall live to run with the pack and to hunt with the pack. And in the end, look you, hunter of little naked cubs, frog eater, fish killer, he shall hunt thee. Now get hence, or by the Sambur that I killed. I eat no starved cattle. Back thou goest to thy mother, burned beast of the jungle, lamer than ever thou camest into the world. Go. So that gives you an idea of what this book actually sounds like, and I love that sort of language, that archaic, considered, stately language. I'm fond of saying that in the reviews, I'm aware, but I actually got goosebumps just reading that. There's a lot more to come in that regard. So, to begin with, I'll say that the Mowgli stories are the best part of this collection. You may be aware that the Jungle Book is actually technically two Jungle Books. The original, the first one, only covers three Mowgli narratives, all of which are at the beginning. Mowgli's brothers, Kaz hunting and Tiger. The rest are just general animal narratives. For example, the White Seal, Rikki Tikki Tavi, Tumai of the Elephants, and Her Majesty's Servants. The second Jungle Book is more weighted, I believe, toward the Mowgli narratives, which again are the reason, I'm assuming the reason that most people read the Jungle Books. How Fear Came, which is actually one of my favourite short stories of all time now, we'll get onto that. The Miracle of Purun Bhagat is not a Mowgli narrative. Letting in the Jungle is. The Undertaker's isn't. The King's Ankus is. Queecairn, I've not read that one. That's the only story I've not read yet. Isn't a Mowgli narrative. Red Dog is, and the Spring Running is. So it's more weighted toward the Mowgli narratives in the second Jungle Books. And I'll say, before we really get into the story and the progression and journey of Mowgli, I'll say that I'm not sure I can recommend the Oxford World Classics version. Although it's got a great introduction, great notes, great appendices, I didn't really go on with the structure of this edition. I feel like it would be a lot better to read the Mowgli narrative in chronological order, and it's very much not the case. So the Mowgli narrative in this edition it jumps back and forward, and also, unfortunately, it's interspersed with the animal narratives, sometimes quite randomly as well. So it can be a little bit difficult to keep track of where Mowgli is, and it can be a bit jarring when certain characters die and then come back. Apologies for the lawnmower in the background. So that's where we are. That's my general thoughts on the book. I took a long time to read this, if I'm being honest, maybe about close to 3 weeks, but that was mostly due to other issues, to do with reading and writing in general. I definitely enjoyed this book. It's just that I felt like I didn't. I have a problem with feeling like I need to read every story in order to have fully finished the book and to keep it on my shelf. I'm not quite sure why. Completionism, I think. If it wasn't, if the Mowgli stories were the only stories in this book, it would be a lot shorter. But I would have read this book in a couple of days. I think the Mowgli stories are quite fantastic. Unfortunately, there's a lot of non-Mowgli stories, most of which I'll skip just to save on time because I'm anticipating this review is going to be fairly long. So we begin with Mowgli's brothers in the first Jungle Book, the very first story of the first Jungle Book. You'll be aware, I'm sure most of you will be aware, Mowgli is this character who is brought up by wolves, mother and father wolf, and his brothers, the wolf brothers. The whole conceit is that Shere Khan, the tiger, is really out to get Mowgli. The story first begins, the way we're introduced to Mowgli is that he's being hunted by Shere Khan, this tiger, or Lungri, the lame one, as he's called in the Jungle Book. And actually, before we carry on, I think one of the main things I should mention is just how different this book is compared to the film version from the 1960s. Not only in the language, but also in how the characters are portrayed. Shere Khan is not this confident, sophisticated, suave character. He's very much he's actually shunned and scorned in the Jungle Books, the original Jungle Books. He's called the lame one. He kills cattle. He kills man. He's feared, but he's not this character that is in command, as it were. That place is taken by Bagheera, the Black Panther, in some respects. And again, just while I'm talking about the characters, I feel like I should mention that because this is a much more aloof, distant, and old style of narrative, the characters come in very quickly and everything moves at a quicker pace. Indeed, about a decade goes past in the first couple of pages, so it's that sort of narrative. Again, that recalls sort of the Silmarillion as well, in the sense that a lot of time is passing. It's more of an aloof, distant narrative, especially at the beginning. But in terms of going back to the characters, Shere Khan is mentioned in the first page or second page. Baloo, the wise brown bear, Bagheera, the Black Panther. They're all mentioned at the very beginning. So I imagined that I would be reading the Mowgli narrative is very much an atmospheric. It is atmospheric, but very much more a slower narrative. We were introduced to the characters in a very much a slower progression. So when I think back to the film version, I imagine Mowgli going through the jungle and then he eventually meets Baloo just by himself. But the characters are all there at the Council Rock to begin with. It's just one thing to keep in mind. And essentially, what happens, not to give too many spoilers, what happens is that Mowgli is sort of taken in by the wolves, and Bagheera and Baloo and the jungle people, as they're called, the animals, they vouch for him against Shere Khan. And from that point, it's really a revenge story against Shere Khan. Mowgli wants to kill Shere Khan, essentially, and vice versa. But there's always this struggle with Mowgli. Is very much a duality with Mowgli. He is of the jungle. He's of the jungle people, the wild beasts of jungle. But he's also a man, of course. He's very much in two halves. So then we come to Kaz hunting, the second story. This highlights how the narrative changes. It goes back and forward in time. For example, I'll just read the very start of this. All that is told here happened sometime before Mowgli was turned out of the Seoni wolf pack, or avenged himself on Shere Khan the tiger. It was in the days when Baloo was teaching him the law of the jungle. So that gives you an idea of just, we're going forward in time, we're going back in time, certain characters reappear and go away again. It can be a bit tricky to keep keep track of. But I won't go too much into this. I'm very much aware that I gave a lot of spoilers in the first attempt at this review. I will say that Kaz Hunting is an excellent adventure story. It's you'll be aware of the, if you've seen the Jungle Book 1960s version, the film version, that there are these monkey people in the Jungle Book called the Bandarlog. So the Bandarlog are these lawless people that are shunned throughout the jungle. They are these people that are always in the trees and gossiping and pulling at Mowgli's hair, and they're very much a lawless sort of chaotic force. They're really well portrayed. And of course, you'll be aware that perhaps that Mowgli is taken by the Bandarlog to the Cold Lairs. Now, the Cold Lairs is an old Indian city, an abandoned city. And Baloo and Bagheera go to find Kaa. The story is, of course, called Kaz Hunting. This is where there's another difference. Kaa himself is really an ally. He's always an ally. He's always a friend. There's no real sense of danger from him like there is in the Jungle Book, the Disney version of the Jungle Book, the film version. And I won't really say much more than that. It's quite a simple story. However, there's one of my favourite parts where, so there's a section in this story that is one of my favourites of the book. It's fantastic. So just to give a bit of context, this great battle happens where the monkeys fight against Bagheera, Baloo, and Mowgli and Kaa. And at the end, when the monkeys are sitting on the walls of the Cold Lairs, this old Indian city, Kaa is showing his true mastery of the jungle, his true nature, his wisdom, his power. So, I mean, he's for context, for a little bit more context, he is lying on a terrace. Everyone's looking at him, and this is what he has to say. "The moon sets," he said. "Is there yet light to see?" From the walls came a moan like the wind in the treetops. "We see, O Kaa." "Good. Begins now the dance of the hunger of Kaa. Sit still and watch." He turned twice or thrice in a big circle, weaving his head from right to left. Then he began making loops and figures of 8 with his body, in soft, oozy triangles that melted into squares and 5-sided figures, and coiled mounds, never resting, never hurrying, and never stopping his low, humming song. It grew darker and darker, till at last the dragging, shifting coils disappeared, but they could hear the rustle of the scales. Baloo and Bagheera stood still as stone, growling in their throats, their neck hair bristling, and Mowgli watched and wondered. "Bandarlog," said the voice of Kaa at last, "can ye stir foot or hand without my order? Speak." "Without thy order we cannot stir foot or hand, O Kaa." "Good. Come all one pace nearer to me." The lines of the monkeys swayed forward helplessly, and Baloo and Bagheera took one stiff step toward them. "Nearer," hissed Kaa, and they all moved again. Mowgli laid his hands on Baloo and Bagheera to get them away, and the two great beasts started as though they had been waked from a dream. "Keep thy hand on my shoulder," Bagheera whispered. "Keep it there, or I must go back to Kaa." "It is only old Kaa making circles on the dust," said Mowgli. "Let us go." And the three slipped off through a gap in the walls to the jungle. "Whoa," said Baloo, when he stood under the still trees again. "Never more will I make an ally of Kaa," and he shook himself all over. Fantastic, just brilliant characterful portrayal of Kaa there, and the true power of this enticing, entrancing presence of Kaa. So the last story I'll talk about in the first Jungle Book, I'm going to skip the 4 general animal narratives in the first Jungle Book, because there's quite a lot still to talk about. It's Tiger Tiger, the third story in the collection. This is where I wasn't sure I was going to continue with the book. This is only on page 49, 48 even. This is a huge spoiler to bring up, but if you don't want to have that spoiler, skip ahead a few minutes. I'm going to be talking about quite a jarring difference between the book and the film. I will say outright that Shere Khan dies in the third story of the first Jungle Book on about page 60. I did not expect that at all. I wasn't I wasn't really a fan of this story. So really, this story is it concerns Mowgli's first real connection with man, his real true nature. He's going back to his true nature. He is of course a man. There's this duality, and it's always pulling him towards the man pack, the man village, and he spends a good few months in this village, meeting a woman called Meswa, and there's his whole life there in the village. I won't really go into it too much, but Shere Khan, who is still alive, he's always hounding him. He's always on Mowgli's trail, and what happens is Mowgli, using his wits, in an almost Lion King-esque scenario, uses sort of herds buffalo into a ravine to kill Shere Khan, to trample and stampede Shere Khan. And that's how Shere Khan dies. It's not at all like the film version, the Disney film version. So that took me aback a little bit. On page 60, I did not expect him to die in such a quick and swift way. And then, interestingly, Mowgli skins Shere Khan, takes the skin back to Council Rock and dances upon it. So there's quite a big difference there. That's really how Tiger ends. So I'll just quickly mention that there's a lot of, it's quite difficult to keep track of because Mowgli goes to the man village a couple of times. He's cast out from the jungle people a couple of times as well. But then over the course of the narrative, he'll be in different places, and it can be a little bit tricky to keep track of. And so on the very end of the third story, it says, "So Mowgli went away and hunted with the 4 cubs in the jungle from that day on. But he was not always alone, because years afterward he became a man and married. But that is a story for grown-ups." Now this is on page 64, and there's a lot more Mowgli stories to cover. So it can be a little bit jarring in that sense. Now, I'm going to skip the general animal narratives. There's quite a few of them. Stories about a white seal, stories about a mongoose fighting a snake, stories about mules and camels and whatnot. I didn't find them particularly interesting. So I'll skip to the second Jungle Book. Now, I think at risk of going too much into this, I'll try and summarize how fear came. One of my favorite short stories of all time now. This is fantastic. It recalls, the reason I like it so much is it's such mythological and serious, and I'm not sure, it's almost like a grand origin story, as it were. It reminds me of my own fantasy world building project, Sartoris, and an ancient cosmological primeval narrative concerning a tiger called Deot, sort of animal god. And this story very much concerns tigers. Deot, the tiger. The story very much concerns tigers and the primeval jungle, the formation of the jungle itself and the law of the jungle. Just fantastic. I really can't sing its praises enough. How fear came. I'll say that it concerns a time of drought. Mowgli is so I will say that the narrative concerns a drought. So all the jungle people are experiencing a drought, and they all congregate at a single river, and they all uphold the water truce. Not one of the jungle people can kill another of the jungle people. This is this great law that they have. However, Shere Khan, who of course died many pages back, has reappeared because we've gone back in time, and he cleans his mouth in the river. He drinks from the river, but blood spills into the river, and we learn that he has killed a man, and everyone is shocked by this and taken aback, and everyone is shunning Shere Khan. Everyone fears him, and everyone says, "You have not only tainted the water that we all have to drink from in this time of drought, but you have also killed a man. And I got goosebumps at the minute. Just got goosebumps. Shere Khan says, "Is it not my night, and is it not my right?" And Shere Khan skulks away in a very confident manner. He knows that he has this one power, and everyone says to Hathi or Hati, as the name is pronounced, this great elephant, the master of the jungle, who knows all wisdom, who knows all lore. Everyone says, "What is Shere Khan talking about? What is this night that's come upon him? What is his right to kill man?" And it's fantastic. It's this frame story where all the animals are drinking from this river, and so Hathi tells the jungle people this story about the primeval jungle and how fear came. So the central idea of the story is there's this elephant called Tha, and I'm aware that I'm going into too much detail here already about the story, but it's one of those ones that I feel like I just need to mention. It's such a great story. There's the ancient elephant, the first of the elephants, called Tha, and he makes the jungle. As he's walking through the land, the jungle arises from his feet, almost in a Princess Mononokean sense, with the stag god in that film. And there's also the first of the tigers, and the first of the tigers is this great adjudicator, is this judge. There are two bucks that are fighting, and the first of the tigers lashes out when one of the bucks knocks into him, and he has committed the first slaying, as it were. And the first of the tigers is ashamed, and so he goes away to the northern marshes. And because the master's left, the first of the tigers is left, there are all these various successors, like the grey ape, who cannot rule at all, the predecessor, the ancestor of the monkey people, the Bandarlog. Everyone laughs at him, and he brings shame to the jungle. And there are all these different rulers, and eventually Hathi, not Hathi, the ancestor of Hathi, Tha, the first of the tigers, says, death has come to the jungle, when of course the first of the tigers killed the buck. Shame has been brought to the jungle because of the grey ape. Now fear shall come, and everyone says, "Who is fear?" And it turns out fear is this naked man in a cave, the first encounter with man in this primeval time. And so the first of the tigers comes back from the marshes. The first of the tigers is beseeching the first of the elephants, Tha, to give him back his power, give him back his respect in the jungle. And Tha says, "You shall have your power. On one night of the year, man shall fear you, and you shall be able to kill man with impunity." That will how it will be from time immemorial. And on one night, the first of the tigers goes out to kill man, goes out to kill fear, this one man in the cave, and he does so. The first of the tigers kills man, kills fear, he thinks. And then he goes to Tha, the first of the elephants, and says, "Look, I have killed fear." And Tha says, "Is this your mercy? Is this what I've given you this power? You should have showed mercy, but now you will have brought more men. They will come and revenge this other man who's just died, that you have killed and slain." And so the first of the tigers is only making it worse for himself. But just to give you an idea of how this sounds, so the first of the elephants says, "Is this thy mercy?" And the first of the tigers licked his lips and said, "What matter? I have killed fear." And Tha said, "O blind and foolish, thou hast untied the feet of death, and he will follow thy trail till thou diest. Thou hast taught man to kill." The first of the tigers, standing stiffly to his kill, said, "He is as the buck was. There is no fear. Now I will judge the jungle peoples once more." And Tha said, "Never again shall the jungle people come to thee. They shall never cross thy trail, nor sleep near thee, nor follow after thee, nor browse by thy lair. Only fear shall follow thee, and with a blow that thou canst not see, he shall bid thee wait his pleasure. He shall make the ground to open under thy feet, and the creeper to twist about thy neck, and the tree trunks to grow together about thee higher than thou canst leap. And at the last he shall take thy hide to wrap his cubs when they are cold. Thou hast shown him no mercy, and none will he show thee." The first of the tigers was very bold, for his night was still on him, and he said, "The promise of Tha is the promise of Tha. He will not take away my night." And Tha said, "The one night is thine, as I have said, but there is a price to pay. Thou hast taught man to kill, and he is no slow learner." The first of the tigers said, "He is here under my foot, and his back is broken. Let the jungle know I have killed fear." Then Tha laughed and said, "Thou hast killed one of many, but thou thyself shalt tell the jungle, for thy night is ended." So the day came, and from the mouth of the cave went out another hairless one, and he saw the kill in the path, and the first of the tigers above it, and he took a pointed stick. And then from there, one of the listeners to the tale comes in with a comedic comment. I don't know if you could tell from that, but I've thoroughly enjoyed that. I love reading that passage. Got goosebumps, even almost a little tear as well. I just love that language, love that style. Very considered and weighty. So I think I'll skip stories like Letting in the Jungle, not much to say on those. The next story I will discuss more in detail is The King's Ankus, which is probably maybe my second favourite story. Of course, How Fear Came would be the first. The story concerns Kaa and Mowgli. They are on a journey together. So the central conceit of The King's Ankus is that there's this white cobra. I can't quite remember how they become aware of him. I believe Kaa's certainly aware of him. Mowgli only knows that the white cobra is hoarding something, and so they go down to the cold layers to check. So a great opening to the story. Again, to give you an idea of how this sounds, and really to contrast between the children's film version and the and the book, the work proper. So Mowgli and Kaa have journeyed to the cold layers, and they've entered this cavern. "A safe lair," said Mowgli, rising to his firm feet, "but over far to visit daily. And now what do we see?" "Am I nothing?" said a voice in the middle of the vault. And Mowgli saw something white move, till, little by little, there stood up the hugest cobra he had ever set eyes on, a creature nearly 8 feet long, and bleached by being in darkness to an old ivory white. Even the spectacle marks of his spread hood had faded to faint yellow. His eyes were as red as rubies, and altogether he was most wonderful. "Good hunting," said Mowgli, who carried his manners with his knife, and that never left him. "What of the city?" said the white cobra, without answering the greeting. "What of the great, the walled city, the city of 100 elephants and 20,000 horses, and cattle past counting, the city of the king of 20 kings? I grow deaf here, and it is long since I heard their war gongs." "The jungle is above our heads," said Mowgli. "I know only Hathi and his sons among elephants. Bagheera has slain all the horses in one village, and what is a king?" "I told thee," said Kaa softly to the cobra, "I told thee 4 moons ago that thy city was not. The city, the great city of the forest, whose gates are guarded by the king's towers, can never pass. They builded it before my father's father came from the egg, and it shall endure when my son's sons are as white as I." Just fantastic. Again, it reminds me of that sort of Tolkienian monarch. I'm not sure if monarchical would be the right word. It's very much about kings and lineage, and it's again so high, such a high style for what you might expect if you've only seen the film version. And so really the story is just an adventure story. It concerns an ankus, which is another word for an elephant goad. It's kind of a harsh implement. It's used to stab an elephant in the forehead to get it to become tame, I think, or to put it under control. And Mowgli takes the king's ankus away from. He's shown this great treasure that the white cobra guards, and he takes one thing away, and it is this ankus. And the white cobra prophesies that it will bring death, and indeed it does, because from there really it opens up to this sort of almost a detective story where the king's ankus becomes lost, and Mowgli and I think it's Mowgli and Bagheera try to find it, and it basically leaves a trail of dead men in their wake because it's this great ankus that is jeweled with cabochons and emeralds and this very fantastical tool with obviously a lot of riches and a lot of worth attached to it. So that's the King's Ankus. A very simple story, but fantastic description. Very atmospheric as well. Red Dog is another great story. It concerns this great battle with what are called the doles of the Deccan or the Deccan. These rabid red dogs that hunt in packs of 100, 200 strong, and they fight the wolves in this great battle. Red Dog is a great story. So I realise I'm really going on quite a lot about these stories, and I've not even covered the other animal narratives, of which there are quite a few. I'll leave it on Spring Running, which fittingly enough is the last story in the Mowgli narrative. So Mowgli, again, this character of great duality. He's split in half. He's of the animals, he's of the beasts, he's of the jungle people, but then of course he's a man, and throughout the narrative he has gone back to the jungle a variety of times. And so as spring comes, winter fades and spring comes, and he feels the pull of man, and he goes out on this great, what he calls the spring running, where he goes up to the marshes and even further, and he meets a village, and there meets Mezwa, this woman, who may or may not be his true mother, before he was raised by the wolves, meets him once again, and really that's where the story ends. Mowgli is aware, he's now 17 or so, 17, 18, and he's aware that he will have to go back to the jungle, and throughout the narrative, Baloo, Bagheera, Kaa, Chil the Kite, Hathi, everyone has been saying throughout the story that a series of stories that man goes back to man at the last, and that is indeed the case. He meets Mezwa, this woman, and her child, her son, and then one of his brothers, his wolf brothers, comes and says, essentially, I can tell that you're sort of fading from the jungle people, and basically come and say goodbye to them at the Council Rock, I think it is. And Mowgli goes there, and Baloo and Kaa, they're all old animals now, old beasts, and it's really a time of parting. So I really teared up almost at the last couple of pages. It's quite a tearjerker, I think. For such an aloof, almost dark and sort of feral narrative. All the animals that are old now, Baloo is almost blind. Kaa is growing old and slow. Just everyone gathers around him, and says essentially, the luck of the jungle go with thee, and that it is time to go. Kaa, for example, says, having cast the skin, we may not creep into it afresh, it is a law. Baloo says, when the honey is eaten, we leave the empty hive. It's time to go, it's time to move on. You've spent 17, 18 years in the jungle, it's time to go. So I think I'll leave it there for the Jungle Book. It's quite a long review, quite a lot to talk about. Still got that one story to read, Creekern, I think it is, about, I think it's set in Alaska. For some reason I've read all the other animal narratives, but that one, I just couldn't quite get into it. But that was a Jungle Book, fairly longer review. I feel like I had to do it justice. It was a bit of a slog at times, but then of course some of these stories are now some of my favourite short stories of all time. How Fear Came, the King's Ankus and whatnot. So hopefully you enjoyed that, hopefully you got something from it. I do tend to go on quite a lot about certain stories and get a bit, maybe perhaps too many details, but that was Rudyard Kipling's The Jungle Book. Thanks for watching, everyone. Till next time.